Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts. Hey there, true believers. Andy Nelson here from the Marvel Movie Minute podcast with the rest of the team.
Pete Wright, Kyle Olson,
Rob Cabasco,
and Matthew Fox.
This is the podcast where we dissect the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time, exploring every detail of this epic superhero franchise.
In our season looking at Iron Man 3, we're going to mix things up a bit.
That's right, Rob and I are your guides, but instead of our usual minute-by-minute format, we dive into 5 minutes of the film in each weekly episode.
It's a totally new approach, but one that still allows us to explore all the depth and detail that makes these movies so special, even if Iron Man 3 isn't all that special.
Hold on, that's where you're wrong. Extremists, Shane Black.
Yeah, would you like to look at the Mandarin and Maya Hansen? Mm-hmm.
So whether you're a die-hard Marvel fan or just love deep dives into movies, there's something for everyone on Marvel Movie Minute.
Suit up and join us on this epic audio adventure. You can find us at truestory.fm or by searching Marvel Movie Minute on your favorite podcatcher.
Because in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, every minute is packed with excitement.
Enough said.
Well, howdy folks, my name is Lester Ryan Clark.
And I'm Keenan Diaz.
And we're the hosts of The Exorcist Minute, a show where we examine, extrapolate, and excavate the scariest movie of all time.
Each episode covers a single minute of William Friedkin's 1973 horror masterpiece, The Exorcist.
If you like deep dives, this show is the deepest.
Did you know the film's iconic theme song, Tubular Bells, wasn't written specifically for the movie?
Or that the 1973 audience members were throwing up and fainting in the theater before they ever got a glimpse of the demon?
Or what about all the crazy on-set mishaps, cast injuries, the director firing real guns?
Ooh. Ever wonder where Ouija boards came from or how they got their name? How about some history on the Catholic Church or the Roman rite of exorcism? Or maybe we can tempt you with some juicy demonology lore. Did you know that Pazuzu had an ex-wife? Find The Exorcist Minute on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to your shows or at theexorcistminute.com. Until next time, folks,
the power of The Exorcist compels you.
Happy New Year, superhero ethics fans. As it is the new year, we're just coming off the holidays. We have not recorded an episode for this week. We're giving you a rebroadcast of one of our favorite episodes on Echo, the TV show, Amputation, and Intersectionality. This one felt particularly appropriate since we just talked about Prey a few weeks ago and Native American representation in that movie and in other things. And Echo, that being such an important factor as well, felt like a great thing to rebroadcast. We're still finishing up with the holidays. We'll be back to you with new episodes next week. For now, hope you enjoy this. Hope you had a very happy holiday, and looking forward to talking to you in the new year. Hello and welcome to this special bonus episode of Superhero Ethics. Friends, we're for the most part keeping to our bi-weekly schedule, but a show came out that is so important to me and that I really loved and I really wanted to watch and talk about. And my good friend Will Freeland, Marvel Comics expert extraordinaire, who's been on this podcast a bunch of times, is back to talk with me. And we're probably going to do a number of different episodes about this show because it has topics and characters that really just like echo through all of the things that I love. And I promise that will be, I can't say the last bad pun I'm going to make about Echo, but probably one of them. Hopefully it'll be the last one because there's really so much for me to talk about here. Let's talk about Echo. It just came out. My friend Will Freeland has watched it, as have I. Will, welcome. Say a bit about who you are.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Will Freeland. I'm all over the place on the internet as Silver Dreamer, Silver with a Y. I also have a podcast called Hype is My Superpower, or me and Steve Storman, who's also been on the pod, and also have had superhero ethics on our pod. We talk about primarily majority Marvel comics and whatever comics. It's kind of like a really fun book club. Just talk about
That's
comics
awesome.
that we read each week.
I love that. And I love that you mentioned that the book club aspect. We're actually be doing some book clubs here on the podcast that I'll talk about in just a minute. But let me actually just ask you first, straight out, Will, what'd you think of the show?
I liked it. It was fun. They added so much, and that's totally fine. It's not a problem. The very first scene of the show completely threw me off. I didn't know what was happening. it kind of had Eternal vibes for me. Like, just
Yep.
what is I was so confused, but I overall, honestly, I had a great time with the show. Um I don't think there was a single side character that I didn't like. The humor was well placed and well timed. It wasn't over the top, and each character kind of had their moment of like, nah. It was captivating. I was binging this thing at like 3 a.m, and I was completely wide awake for it. And I it's worth the 5 episode sit down. It was great.
Yeah. It really is. It really is. And for me as an amputee, obviously this is a character that really resonated with me, that I was so excited about, that I was so nervous about. And it really hit on every cylinder. And I'm going to talk about that a lot, particularly, and it has meant so much to me that I was able to kind of take this feeling of, you know, I'm an amputee. I'm seeing myself on screen. I'm seeing the issues I go with from like the larger stuff, but just the moment to moment stuff that most people don't think about. I'm seeing that on screen, and then being to go online and hear, you know, from deaf people, from Native people, from women, from so many others who saw themselves in this. In many ways, I kind of feel like this is a kind of a masterclass on intersectionality in terms of what we got in this show, and we'll talk about all that. But also, I've seen shows that try to be like, we are going to be social justice-y and we're going to check this box and this box and this box, and they forget to actually be a good show. And this isn't that. Like, from the moment, like, the fight scenes are very well choreographed, the history and background is interestingly done, all of the characters are engaging. Yeah, everything about it. And I will admit, I've had some superhero fatigue recently, and even some, I know, hard to say to some folks out there, but some Marvel fatigue. I haven't watched Secret Invasion. I haven't watched Loki season 2. Some of the other stuff that I'd seen was, though I've heard Loki season 2 is pretty good. I just didn't like Loki season 1. That's a whole other matter.
Oh, well, okay.
But yeah, more than anything, I think I walked away from this thinking the Marvel Netflix universe is back. You know, not that it's quite the same, and we can talk about continuity in a minute, because I think they made it pretty clear that this is not the same continuity as the Marvel Netflix universe. But the tone of it, Kingpin felt much more like Kingpin than he did in the Hawkeye show.
Yes.
Freaking Daredevil was back, which granted from a small scene, but I had no idea. Yeah, it felt like Marvel, like the spirit of the Marvel MCU, the Netflix MCU was back.
I absolutely agree. It's funny because you know, the first like 20 minutes of the first episode is the one that has all of the like cameos outside of Kingpin, has like the cameos and like the flashbacks and like the cool fun holy crap it's Daredevil kind of stuff. And that is exactly what I've been saying Marvel's never gonna do. And so I'm so happy that they did it and just straight up proved me. It's like they were listening to an episode of my podcast and they were just like, oh, he thinks that? Okay. Because I've always said that it's too expensive. There's no way they're going to spend the money on random cameo appearances for one scene like that to make the universe actually feel connected in each individual show. There's no way they're going to do that. But they did. They brought in Charlie Cox. They did it was just showing the same scene from Hawkeye, but they had a scene with Jeremy Renner or a handful of scenes with Jeremy Renner in it. They you know, at the end they had Roxxon on the gas station. Like they had these bigger universe name drops that for Roxxon it's not going to cost them anything, but they can have like, oh, in this world there are other things, like having Kingpin invest in like this amazing tech for Maya to use, and then for healing his eye.
Oh my God.
Like you think of Kingpin and you think money, crime, mob boss type stuff. You don't think of him having the money to go and spend on tech. And the fact that they had that, and it's just like, they don't have to explain that this eye patch with the blue light on it is super healing and all that kind of stuff. And like, that's the world of the MCU and Marvel that I want to live in. Tony Stark
Yeah.
isn't the only one that flexes tech. It doesn't have to be an Iron Man or a Spider-Man show to have tech that like shows the world is advancing in ways that we just don't in ours. And it's so much fun. I loved it.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up because it hits for me in two very different ways. One is about Wilson Fisk that I want to talk about because to me that scene is essential for understanding Fisk. But also because for me, and I want to be clear, I am a disabled person, both some mental stuff, but also particularly physical in terms of my my amputation. Deafness is not, I am not deaf or hard of hearing, and while there's a lot of overlap between deafness and disability, a lot of deaf folks don't say that deafness is disability. So I'm speaking about how that scene hit me as a disabled person. I'm not deaf, so take all this with a grain of salt. And if deaf people have very different feelings about this, I'm happy to listen to that. But for me, that scene made me cry so much. First, for all the Kingpin reasons, Wilson Fisk reasons, but also because you've probably heard me talk about this. A lot of my fans have heard me talk about this. I and a lot of other disabled people are often very frustrated by if we appear in science fiction or fantasy, yes, the character might be disabled, but very quickly the science, the crazy science technology or the magic is able to basically erase the disability.
Right.
To a point where, like, and that's an interesting story idea, but then at that point, the character is no longer someone that person's life is no longer something that like disabled folks relate to in any way.
Right.
And or like many of us. Again, I'm trying to speak not in generalities, but just but these ideas I'm talking about are widely understood by a lot of other folks in these communities. And so, like, to have it where there is this incredible technology, but it's not technology to make her hearing, because, you know, if you remember, even in Hawkeye, she actually says to Hawkeye, like, that he relies too much on technology, and that's kind of a critique he has, and that she clearly, like, she is deaf. That's who she is. She doesn't want to fix that necessarily. So what the technology does is to allow him to better communicate with her using sign language. Mm-hmm. And it is clearly like sci-fi technology, at least as far as I know. It's possible that someone's actually coming pretty close to inventing that already. And if they haven't, you know, go ahead and do it, because it certainly seems like it would be possible. But so just seeing that moment, to me, that felt like people who understand these concerns and issues are very involved in making the show, because it was, you know, to me, it's kind of like the difference between technology that would fix a person, and it like fix is a word I'm using in huge parentheses because that's part of the point, is that it's not, people don't need to be fixed. Right. But like, you know, you could give someone like, oh, hey, your paralysis is fixed, you're no longer in a wheelchair. Or like if they gave them like their wheelchair had nanotech so that whenever they were at a step, they could like instantly generate a ramp. You know, like that would be like awesome science fiction technology that's about still helping a person who has the disability. So it just, that moment hit to me on that part at least. And I'll talk about the Wilson Fisk thing in a minute, but you just kind of respond. It was just like, every time I complain about like Yoda dropping the cane and bouncing around and all this kind of stuff, or like Avatar and all the ableism of that, like, this is what I mean. This is what we want.
Yeah, that was phenomenal. I thought it was just such a cool application of technology, and I loved that they played it in a way that you could kind of hear the translation in Fisk's ear as it was playing. Yep. I loved that. And then like as soon as Maya called him out, I was just like, you never even bothered to learn ASL to communicate with me. It made me feel so guilty for being so excited about having this technology, and I was like, wait, no, there literally is and has been a way for them to communicate. He just never put in the effort. Oh, damn. Oh no. Right? Am I part of the problem? It was like it spiraled for a good like 30 seconds while I'm trying to watch the show, and I was like, man, that is really well done. I feel like they pulled in, and again, like as you're saying, okay, I am not I'm not disabled physically, and I like I don't, I'm not hard of hearing other than like just have a thick skull, but like, so I don't know what it's like to be on the other side of that conversation. And from my perspective, it seemed like, and you've been saying this a couple of times, but like it seemed like they really put in the effort to really tell this story from Maya's perspective as a deaf person. And like, you have your classic, I was a child, you shouldn't have let me go, but then you have the extended family being like, I was also in pain, like, and there's that classic storytelling of like whose pain was greater, and the fact that we never actually had a conversation means that you feel like I was never hurting. But then there's these other conversations and story beats where only an amputee or a deaf person would have this kind of conversation with people, and that they like they were able to do it and weave it into the storytelling. It felt like seamlessly. That was so impressive to watch as an able-bodied hearing person. That was I loved it. It was great.
Yeah. Well, and I really love what you brought up though about how she is like, wait, you could see her being like, oh my God, I'm so impressed and so, honored that you've made all this effort to make all this technology. Although it's also very possible he's just like, he just, called up his friends at Roxxon and said, hey, do this, or whatever. But also she called, like you said, she calls him out and says, but you haven't done the work. And I thought to me, that was a moment that said so much about Wilson Fisk, because what I noticed was, I'm going to kind of go through a couple of points here as a larger thing, but let me start with this and see if you saw it the same way. I felt like the show made it very, very clear without any doubt that yes, he is manipulating her. Yes, he is using her as a tool in his army. But his feeling of familial love towards her and like treating her like a daughter is 100% real.
Absolutely.
And because one of the things I noticed was that like the first scene where we see them kind of really interacting as the story goes forward, not that's more flashbacky stuff, where she's gotten in trouble with the law. I think she was like stealing a motorcycle or something. And he shows up just like, it's kind of like, he hears about her in trouble and he goes to her in the middle of the night. And he has with him an ASL interpreter who clearly he to some extent trusts not to talk about the things that they're going to say. Now, clearly doesn't trust entirely. As we learned, she does not come to a good end. But part of what that told me was that he had already thought about this. And like, I don't think that he is it's not that he said, oh yeah, she's deaf, but I'm going to forget about that and not really care much about it. I think he very clearly had gone to great lengths to say, a member of my family is deaf. I want to make sure that I'm able to deal with that and to communicate with that at all times. But also the way he approaches the world is not, I am going to like take time away and sit in a classroom and learn, but I'm going to throw money at this problem and fix it. Yeah. And to me, like, you know more about the character from comics, but from what I've seen in just the MCU shows, that felt like a perfect illustration of who Fisk is.
Oh yeah. I mean, so the MCU, for all of its grandioseness, is much more down to earth than the comics.
Yeah.
And the way that they go about problem solving, even though it is otherworldly sometimes, is a lot more practical. And the where I'm going with this is literally just yesterday I had a conversation with my wife about if we had money, the what we could throw, like there are problems in our lives that you can just throw money at and you don't have to worry about it. Yep. Like plumbing. I don't know plumbing. I'm not going to put in the work to learn plumbing. I'm going to throw some money at a plumber to go and do that for me. Right? And so like Fisk's, and that's another freaking parallel between me and Fisk that's stressing me out. But like he saw he adopted this young girl who is deaf and an amputee, and instead of learning how to ASL, he throws money at the situation, gets an interpreter, and then down the line he has more money. And so what can more money do? Oh, throw in an interpretation contact lens and and a camera and a translator in his ear so he doesn't have to put in the work. Like it's what problems can I solve with money so I can focus on the things that can't be solved with money? That's how I like to see the world, and apparently that's how Fisk sees the world, and that's not how our hero sees the world, and that's a problem for me.
Yeah, no, I get that. Well, and I'm going to question the use of the word hero, which is something we'll get to in a bit.
Sure.
For this podcast. But like, to me, I also think about the scene that, when she's a young girl and he takes her, or he coming to pick her up from school, and she wants to buy ice cream.
Yeah.
And the ice cream guy is like, really rude to her and ableist and clearly like really hurts her. That scene was one of, like, the thing about Fisk is, particularly the Daredevil show, particularly in season 1, it's like 51% a Daredevil origin show and 49% a Wilson Fisk origin show.
Absolutely.
A Kingpin. Because Vincent D'Onofrio manages to make him so incredibly compelling and so incredibly sympathetic in ways where you're like, there are times in my life where I feel red hot anger, and there's a part of me that wants to use my fists and go out and fix the problem that I'm seeing. And I'm not very good at fighting, so it would be a very bad idea, but also, like, I just think morally that's not the right thing to do. And, like, so when he gets out of that limo, and it was just shot so perfectly to build the suspense, and he starts walking towards that ice cream guy, I had this really uncomfortable mix of dread and exhilaration. Because I was so afraid of what he was going to do to that ice cream guy, and I so badly wanted to see him utterly kick the ass of the ice cream guy.
Yeah.
And it's the, like...
It also, the way that they did that scene where he was so in touch with his emotions, it felt like, oh, this is early Kingpin.
Yeah.
Like, by the time we get to, like, Daredevil season 3, that I guess there's two ways to think about it. One, it's like there's the experienced Kingpin who he's going to have more control of his emotions to deal with situations like that, because you only ever see quote unquote outbursts to that degree seldomly in the later seasons. However, it could also be said that this is a Kingpin who is in control of his emotions until family gets involved.
Yeah.
Because when Matt starts or poking Fisk about Vanessa and stuff, that's when he loses it. So you see someone who is belittling and disrespecting his chosen family. Yeah, that's gonna bubble up also. But that scene was, it didn't go where I thought it was gonna go. I thought he was either just going to make a statement to him, say something, or he was going to actually just kill the guy. And then for him to do that, like, I want to keep Maya relatively innocent and make a phone call and try to replace it, and then have her show up, and just that's her origin. Like, that's her, like, Kingpin, Queenpin origin story. She goes and kicks him twice with her with her foot, and it's just like, oh my god, this is
literally. I was watching it with one of my partners, and as she goes over, like, my partner says, "This is way too dark for Disney, but I really hope she kicks the guy too." And then she went and kicked the guy too, and I was like, "That's so." Because you're right, it's her origin, it's her, and I think part of that also is, like, her father had kind of, like, exposed her to some of that. But yeah, and I want to talk a lot about her character, to be sure, but just because we started with Kingpin, for me it's that, like, I think you're right, it's that he's upset that he sees her disrespected, but even more so, I think it's that he sees the pain on her face. And obviously this is a daughter, not a mother figure, But I think it really highlights that for Fisk, his central motivation is protection. He wants to protect the people he loves and cares about, which then becomes, and then we see in that brilliant end scene, becomes all the people of his city, and to me, that's also where him and Daredevil are is like, you always hear about the superhero being like, this is my city and you can't do this in my city. And I think that's Fisk's motivation as well.
Oh, absolutely.
You can't do this to my mother. You can't do this to my daughter. You can't do this to my city.
Oh man, yeah, that end credit scene is impressive.
Yeah. Last thing about that, I want to say, this is the theory that I have, and I'm wondering if you're feeling the same. For me, one thing they also did in this is to say, yes, these are the same characters, but this is a different continuity. This particular universe, and it may well be that like they've added now the other MCU Netflix shows to the official timeline on Disney Plus. So it may be that they're saying that like in a different continuity, because remember, we're in the multiverse, so that all those other shows are canon, just not in this universe. But that this particular Wilson Fisk and Daredevil we are watching are not the exact same ones from the other one. And the things that really stood out to me about that were, it's very brief, but they show him looking at that white picture, the one that he buys in Netflix when he meets Vanessa. That one was horizontal. This one is vertical, and it's a little bit different. And it's just there was just such an interesting change that felt to me like it was very specifically being like, no, this is not the same.
Yeah,
exact
same
story.
but different.
Yeah, and then again, the timing of it, his now doing his mayoral run when it already happened in those. To me, it just was like, yeah, this is a different continuity.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. Oh man.
So, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm just thinking, about the characters in the show. They did a lot with Echo. Most of the so, so I guess to fulfill my role, because you bring me on to these comic based shows to talk about the difference between the show and the comic. Like 98% of this is original and new. In the comic, so specifically, just from the very beginning, Maya is a Choctaw tribe. Is from the Choctaw. I think it's Choctaw. Is how do you spell it? Choctaw. In the comics, she's Cheyenne, and I think it's just because of where they decided to set the show. That's not a big deal.
Right.
She's not necessarily very in touch with her heritage in the comics, and so what tribe she's a part of or what tribe she's from is not a big deal. That like spiral power that has been passed down through her lineage, that's not a thing. In the comics, she has photographic reflexes, just like Taskmaster. And that's her only power. And they get around. She is deaf in the comics. She's not an amputee in the comics, but she is deaf.
Right.
But she's such a good lip reader that they just kind of ignore that as much as they want. And so, like, if someone's talking to her in a mask, she can't understand what they're saying. But like,
right.
And so, like, that's kind of the only time it really comes up is when people are looking away from her and trying to talk to her, and she's like. And so she speaks. So she's like, she says, "I can't understand what you're saying. You have to look at me." But so as far as
so
like
she can speak in the in the comic.
Yeah. And so like it's just like a oh hey by the way kind of a thing that doesn't get it's not part of her identity or how people interact with her much, just because it's such a non-big deal because she's so good at lip reading, which is kind of weird, but it is what it is. Most recently in the comics, she became a host of the Phoenix Force, which is a whole other thing. And she hasn't done a whole. She's a side character. She's only been a title character, I think, twice. Most recently, like this last year, was Daredevil and Echo, and she's been on Avengers, been on the new Avengers. You know, she was involved in Secret Invasion and this other stuff, but she doesn't have a whole lot of like primary screen time. And so they kind of had a blank slate to work with for the MCU and bringing her in. And yeah, everything they've done so far has just been fantastic, but it's all very original. And I don't even think there's a character reference for them to pull from as far as like this Choctaw legacy and stuff. That is completely original to the best of my knowledge.
I mean, well, my understanding is that it is original to the MCU, that it is not invented from whole cloth. It is actual Choctaw legend and things like that. And to that extent, I am glad in some ways that this is new, because the idea of Stan Lee or someone like that doing their version of, again, the character appeared much later, but like Stan Lee doing Choctaw legends in the 1970s does not strike me as a great idea.
Oh, God, no. Yeah, no, yeah. Maya got introduced in the late 90s. So she's a pretty new character. Yeah.
But like, when I started the show, and it starts with this like beautiful depiction of the Choctaw creation myth, or at least the creation myth of humans, I literally stopped the show to make sure I was watching the same thing. Because with my thought that it was kind of be like referencing Netflix MCU, and that it was based in Hawkeye, which was a very kind of like low-powered show. Like everyone there is trained in ways, but I don't think anyone in Hawkeye really has superpowers, such as we talk about them. And so to start with like super mystical thing, I was like, did I start the wrong thing or something? Turned out obviously I did not. And I wound up really loving it because you said you got kind of the Eternals vibe from it. I admit I watched Eternals once and have now mostly blanked it out of my brain. So it's very possible it's the same. What I got, though, was some echoes of the, I'm going to say Atlantean because I don't remember the pronunciation of the, I think Adelon.
Yeah.
The native, the group that is referred to as Atlanteans in Black Panther 2, who are also based very much in native indigenous communities, but of Central America. And what I really loved was that it felt to me like, you know, like if you take like tribal myths from like Spain and tribal myths from like, you know, Sweden, they probably are going to bear some connection to each other that's a lot more than like they would have to something from Japan, but they're still vastly different because they're on, you know, thousands of miles apart.
Sure.
This felt to me like it had a little bit of some of the same, and again, I'm not a visual person, so I might be completely making this up, or I was like projecting it, but it felt like it had a little bit of the same kind of idea in terms of the visual construction of it, but was still very unique and different. Very, you know, to these two different like communities that MCU is introducing that are based in, you know, our own world's understanding of, you know, the myths and Stories from Native American communities and indigenous communities. So yeah, I really liked that, but I was definitely very confused. I was like, where are we going with this? And
yeah,
because I didn't see it coming at all that Echo would have superpowers, and I really loved the way that they did it and this kind of slow build, and the fact that the introduction of each of these different Choctaw legends, everything from the like, you know, the creation myth to, hey, by the way, lacrosse is a sport based in something from Native Americans, which, by the way, I believe that in the upcoming Olympics, the Iroquois Nation, which has members of both American and Canadian citizenship, are going to get, because it's, but yeah, so this acknowledgement of like, yeah, it's not exactly lacrosse, but it's clearly the sport that our modern day sport of lacrosse was based in, to the whole thing about the light horsemen and the significance of the braid, which they never commented on. But, you know, in the film, they say, you know, braids were supposed to be for warriors and that's not for women. as the show goes on, Echo is wearing more and more of her hair in a braid until by the last big fight scene, or actually I think it was when she comes to her family after, it's a braid all the way down. It was just, I just loved it. And I thought the way that they weaved her story into those creation stories and legends of her people was just utterly fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And with her mom being, oh man, it's just, and I actually kind of like that they didn't dive in. It's one of those things where it's like, were you paying attention? But in the car crash, when it looked like Maya was checking her mom's pulse, but she did it with both hands, and it looked like she was trying to heal her mom in the car crash, like right after the crash.
Yeah.
And then you find out, 4 episodes later, that that's the motion that her mom would do to do her healing ability, and it's just it just adds that extra little heartbreak of Maya trying to heal her mom, and it's just man. But we're, that was a complete tangent, but bring in her mom for the last story to bring everything together as far as showing different origins of the past. I loved the way that her mom was just like, you need to be brave, and it has the episode 1 flashback, you need to be cunning, the episode 2 flashback, and just the way that just in the way that they chose to tell this story worked so almost flawlessly to keep everything wrapped up into one coherent book, for lack of a better phrase. It was awesome. It felt like you actually had one team, one good writer making one good season of a show, and not something. If this had come out weekly, I'd be so scared that by episode 5 something would have been reshot or changed because of XYZ feedback, and it felt like a complete thought, and I hope that they feel like the showrunners feel like they did what they set out to do, because it felt like it.
Yeah. No, I think it's very true. And I know we've heard stories about that they released it all at once because Marvel doesn't believe in this, and I don't know the behind the scenes, but I thought it works much better because it's all as one. And again, also that's a throwback to the Netflix shows that were also released all as one. And just one more thing on her as well. I love that one of the things that is praised about her and is said this is something you embody from your ancestry is her ferocity. Because I think ferocity is something we often think of as a negative thing for a hero, because it's about, Kingpin is ferocious. It's about being able to almost kind of berserker rage is what comes to mind from that. And so to me, it is still balanced with healing, and the fact that she has 2 different opportunities to kill Fisk, or at least one to actually do it, one to try, and both cases she doesn't, and in the second one she literally tries to heal him. Which doesn't seem like it worked, which is something we'll talk about later, which was curious. But I just thought that naming her ferocity, but also showing that unlike Fisk, she can keep control of it, I think was a really beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
So, is she a hero?
She's a Netflix hero, which is so different. I don't know. I have trouble calling most title characters in the MCU heroes if you use the definition that they don't kill, because most of them do, and it's usually unnamed bad guys. So, or I should say unnamed hired thugs and terrorists. So, how do you define a hero?
So it's interesting. I've never heard that definition before, and I would say I don't think there's a single superhero I've ever seen on screen who doesn't kill, just because I don't think that they understand how bodies react to the massive concussive forces that even Batman's fists do. But that's another thing. I think for me, the way I would define a hero, and we've done whole episodes about this, it's a very complicated topic, but if I had to use a brief rubric, it's are you using your powers? And your powers can be superpowers, your powers can be your fighting ability, your powers can be your money or your political influence, whatever. But are you using the power that you have to protect the things that are personally relevant to you, which can be yourself, your family, the people you love and care about, or are you doing it in a more altruistic way to protect like people? Are you working to protect people you don't know, basically? And so for me, like I think that most of the Netflix people are heroes, and I think that's kind of the thing for Jessica Jones is when she's the most reluctant hero of them. In some ways, Nick Cage, but when she goes from like I'm just gonna like look out for me and my sister to I'm gonna look out for like others, and she's so grumpy and reluctant about it, but that's when she becomes a hero. Whereas like Punisher to me never become because Punisher's always about his own personal revenge quests. Right. And I love his character, to be clear, but I just don't think he's a hero. I think he's a villain in a lot of ways in the MCU, at least. But to me, I feel like she hasn't quite crossed that line. Like, she kind of protects all the people at the even there. Like, it's her family who protects everyone else at the powwow. And I admit, I don't really know why Fisk wanted to like kill all the people at the powwow, and that's a whole other thing. I think it was mostly just to like cause a disturbance so that he could get to Echo. But yeah, I think she is heroic in many ways, and she has great power, and she uses that great power, and she resists killing her enemies when they're not in the middle of a fight, which I think is heroic. But yeah, I think she's still very much a gray character who heroes can be gray, but like I don't know where she's gonna. I think she's gonna be. My sense is that she will be an antagonist to Daredevil, and maybe by the end take like. I don't know if this is actually a comparison that people have drawn before, but I could see her very much becoming the Catwoman to Daredevil's Batman. Oh. Catwoman is never quite a hero, and in some ways you're like, Batman, do you treat her more like a villain, less like a villain because she is like you think she has a purer heart, or because she looks so good in those tight leather pants? And similarly about the writers, but like, she takes hero turns. She helps Batman, but often for like, all right, fine, I'll help you kind of reasons. And yeah, so I don't know if that's a comparison that's been made before, because I know her and Daredevil have relationships in the comics. I imagine she will wind up teaming up with Daredevil in some very reluctant way against Kingpin in the show, kind of like Elektra does. But I think she will remain some kind of morally gray, not quite heroic figure.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess to the comic book nerd, the knee-jerk reaction is like, no, that's Elektra. But
right.
That doesn't mean you can only have one Catwoman to your Batman. So that's totally
I was gonna say, God forbid that Marvel have numerous characters who play similar roles to each other.
Yeah, heavens forbid. I guess the way I see it is like she had 20 years of this very dark upbringing under Fisk's rule, quote unquote, versus her like 8 years on the Choctaw Nation before her mom passed. So, and you can't overweigh those first 8 years compared to the last 20 in one visit back home. So yeah. I think the first step is embracing her lineage and how she was descended from the first. I think that Choctaw's name was Chafa.
Yeah,
she is directly descended by Chafa. Embracing that and then using that as your compass to hopefully become a hero. But yeah, I don't think she's there yet.
Which I believe Chafa is also her mother's name, and it's supposed to be very significant.
Oh, I thought her mom's name was Taloa.
Oh, you might be right. Okay. I certainly could have missed something there. I know the first episode title is also Chafa.
Yeah, the first episode. Yeah, so each episode's name, I think, is the name of the the flashback character. So Chafa,
Oh,
Loak,
gotcha. Okay, yeah.
Tupelo, Taloa, and then the fifth episode's name
And
is
then
Maya.
Maya.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I did love how they did all that. Clearly, people have gotten the memo that generational trauma is what we want to see, and like seeing the scene, her scene with her grandmother, where again, I think this is more than Netflix what it does. Although I think like some of the other Disney shows have done this as well. Like they didn't have a here's why I felt this way, here's why I felt this way, tearful reunion. I think the grandmother is clearly wrong and does a horrible thing by kicking out her son-in-law and her daughter.
Yeah.
But also the pain she feels is like, I have not lost a child. I can only imagine what it's like. But it's not like I think, oh, she must be a monster. I can very much emotionally understand where she was coming from and the way she is both defending it, but also showing with all this guilt how wrong she was, and the way that Echo isn't willing to just forgive that at first. It felt very, very real. I just thought just everything about the family was so well done.
Yeah.
All the characters were interesting. So there's so much we could talk about, and I think we're going to do more episodes. And I will say on the MCU cast, which is part of the Stranded Panda Network, which I'm a huge fan of, used to be a part of, they're doing episode by episode coverage. Definitely recommend people check that out. It is phenomenal. It's going to be phenomenal, I'm sure. We're not going to try and do that, so we're not going to go through everything. But I wanted just to kind of move back to the conversation of representation and the like, and talk a bit about what it was like there's great people who are talking about deafness in the show. Great people talking about native representation in the show. The Choctaw Nation, like they specifically say, was very involved. There's a lot of Choctaw and other native creators who've been talking about this. I want to talk about what the show was like for me as an amputee and the larger question of representation. And I want to start by asking you, actually, Will. And as I say this, it feels like I'm setting you up. There's no right answer. As to any perspective you have, go for. But I'm curious, what is your feeling about representation in these kind of shows?
Okay, blanket statement. I love it. I love that as the non-represented, a member of the that isn't represented in some of these shows. I love seeing the posts, the random suggested posts that they sent my way either through Facebook or through Twitter of people being moved so much by seeing their representation. I would say, so I'm African American, and I feel like classically African Americans are the only ones that get that, like, oh hey, we've been represented here. And so like when Black Panther happened, it was a big deal, but like it didn't feel like such a big deal to me because we've had representation before. Like we have our Blade and Wesley Snipes, and we have our famous Black actors that have done amazing things and have all these accolades and accomplishments. And so it's like, cool, yay, Black people, cool. But then seeing this representation for deaf people and amputees, and the wave of excitement that flew across the internet during Hawkeye. Because I feel like especially with Hawkeye, there's two different kinds of deaf representation, with Hawkeye trying to struggling with his hearing aids, versus Maya just fully embracing the fact that she's deaf and not that she can use hearing aids. Being born deaf and becoming deaf, I think, are two very different things as far as your relation to deafness.
Actually, I don't know for sure, but my memory is that he's better described as hard of hearing rather than actually deaf. But I'm not, and that's not connected to birth. But like,
not being
that's my guess. I don't know. We're both
but I do appreciate the distinction. So, and seeing how excited people were about, because there have been amputees, like if you watch like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Slingshot lost both of her arms, and they gave her bionic arms. And then Misty Knight is another famous arm amputee. almost every single time it's replaced with something that's a high-tech replacement, and it's an upgrade and not this is the real world application of what would actually happen.
Yep.
And for them to keep it for Maya, it being someone who's non-amputee, I think I appreciate it. And like, I don't want to say it's novel because I don't want to like trivialize the impact, but like I really like seeing it initially, and then I go to the internet and people are just loving it, and I've seen like posts from you and other people saying, you know, as an amputee, this is one of the greatest things I've ever seen, and that's so exciting to me. I love that. The same way that like representation of homosexuality, like on Schitt's Creek, versus other gay couples in other shows, where like it's a plot point and it's like they embrace it in a way that's a comedic way, and it in Schitt's Creek it's just natural. They're not praised for being together in public and all this other stuff. It's just another relationship. And so I think that's the goal for representation, of just like, we're not basing the story around this situation for the character. It's just they have it, and for Maya, she uses her metal foot in ways that people with flesh feet cannot, and that's what you want to see. And it felt so
tip,
exciting.
Tying up someone, but pro tip: tying someone up by the ankles when they have a prosthetic foot, bad idea. Because we're kind of Mr. Potato Heads in that regard. But no, I'm totally,
it's so much fun. I love it.
I'm totally with you. And for me, I mean, it made me cry numerous times because I got to, and I had that already with Echo from Hawkeye. There were just a couple of moments, and I'm not going to go through everything, but I want to go through some of those moments of how it affected me. I also want to say that while I am an amputee, and I think you're right, a lot of other amputees are feeling similar to this. I should also say, like, a terminology issue. There are people who, in the same way there's like deaf and hard of hearing and the exact definitions, amputee, I think, is often used as a catch-all phrase for people who use prosthetic legs. That's not actually accurate, because some people are born without a limb for whatever reason. In the same way someone could be born deaf, they will often still use a prosthetic leg. They are not technically amputees.
Right.
I think the term that is, that we looked this up, the two terms that I saw that are used most often, one is limb deficient, which is utterly awful, and talk about like super ableist, like you're not what it should be. The other is
sound right. Okay.
the other is unipod or uniped, which is fine, and like, you know, uniped versus biped.
Sure.
My understanding from Latin that I studied 25 years ago and never got above a B- in, so it could be wrong, is that for the singular it should be pod, not ped, but I could be wrong. Personally, I prefer monopod or monoped instead of uniped, because then it can be shortened to moped. But that's just my own thing. I know, sorry, bad jokes. That's what you're gonna get with me. I will though say, like, so I'm going to speak from that perspective, but it's not a univocal community. Like, I posted a couple things online about this already, and in one conversation, there's someone who's also an amputee who's like, I hate representation, blah, 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 blah. You know, I don't want to see myself on screen like this. I don't need that. Granted, this person also thinks wokeness is the worst thing happening to America. So we're not really seeing things the same way in a lot of ways, but I want to acknowledge that that's another amputee who feels differently about this, and I'm sure he's not alone, or they're not alone. I think but who knows? It's a Twitter person. So with all those caveats, the first moment that I knew, yes, this is going to be honest to my experience and to the experience of other amputees, particularly leg amputees, people whose arms, obviously, and that's a different thing, but I think related. She gets out of the hospital, and she and her father are getting ready to go to New York because the grandmother is kind of kicking them out and saying, like, you're not welcome here. And she doesn't have a prosthetic leg yet. Because, like, when most people lose their leg in a traumatic accident of some kind, like sometimes it's an amputee and it's planned, like with diabetes or something like that. Even there, though, I think it can still take a while to heal, but especially if it's a traumatic accident, it can take weeks or months to the point of like any contact on that part of your limb is possible. Because often they need to do like skin grafts or muscle grafts or other things like that. So when like Misty Knight gets this badass prosthetic arm 2 days later, it makes for a cool story. And don't get me wrong, Misty Knight's an incredible character, but that doesn't speak to the like amputee experience. At least not. It's an arm. It's not my experience, but like I think a lot of people at the time said like it's not realistic.
Sure.
So the fact that she's leaving the hospital, it's probably been like a couple of weeks or at least a week or so, and her stump is still fully bandaged up. She does not have a prosthetic leg. I was like, yes, that's it. The fact that her grandfather, who's clearly very good at machinery and stuff like that, but is not a prostheticist himself, and is certainly not like a Tony Stark level inventor, yeah, when she breaks her prosthetic because it gets stuck, which is a very real thing and can certainly happen, and when I saw that, I was like, if that prosthesis is fine, I'm going to be so mad. But it clearly wasn't, and she was like limping on it afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And then they make her one that, again, it's not a perfect fit. She has to limp some, and because it's going to take time for him to fix this and to do it right. All of those things, I was like, yes, this is much more accurate to the amputee experience. Certainly the leg one, and there were times where she can do things with her leg that I absolutely cannot do with mine. And like the combat, like the way my leg fits, it fits pretty well. But if I start to do like lots of kind of crazy footwork things, like the hold between my leg and my stump is not perfect, and it's going to start to wiggle around some and be a problem. And certainly if I like impact it in very hard ways, it will, like it could come off, or certainly it will, become loosened, and also be very painful to me. And certainly, if I drop from a height and land on it, I tried rock climbing. Granted, this was like 10 years ago, and prosthetic technology has advanced a lot. But I tried rock climbing 10, 15 years ago, and I dropped like 5 feet, and it was incredibly painful because it was like, and I think the one she has much better shock absorbers than the one I had back then. The one I now have has shock absorbers that are better than my car's. But still, for me, I imagine it would be painful and difficult. But the fact that it is literally an actress with her own prosthetic leg doing those things. And you mentioned before that she's not an amputee in the comics. Awesome part of the story. They were looking for a native deaf actress who also could do fight scenes. And as it happened, the one they found was an amputee. And so instead of trying to like always keep her in pants or something like that, they were just like, fine, our character's an amputee now as well.
Right.
Which is just like, talk about wonderful representation. Like there's the intentional, like we want a deaf character, so we want a deaf actress. But oh, hey, the actress has an amputation, so let's just make that part of the character as well. That's also just awesome. But, and from all the interviews and things that I've seen, I am convinced that for the most part, some stuff's probably an exaggeration because fight movies are always an exaggeration of what physics can actually do, Even Bruce Lee, used sometimes wires and stuff like that for the incredible scenes. Sure. I believe that's how certainly many martial arts movies do. The point of all this being the fact that it was Alakwa Cox doing it, and I think I'm pronouncing her name right, and if not, please let me know, fans, told me that I could trust that these are things that a person with a prosthetic could do. But it's funny also because at first I was wondering, like, does she have a very different, like, does she have it like really strapped into her leg? No, I think you've seen me. I just have a rubber thing that fits on my stump, and it has a pin at the end of it, and then the pin plugs right into my prosthetic. And there's one moment where it's half a second and you might miss it, but she puts her stump into her leg and it doesn't click immediately, and she has to kind of adjust and push her leg down again. And I was like, that's my experience. I've seen that. So yeah, I just thought all those stunts, all that stuff, yeah, some of it's MCU movie making magic, and that's fine because they do it with everyone else. But there was never a time where it felt like that doesn't fit what an amputee could do, what a person with a prosthetic leg could do.
That's awesome. I really like hearing that. What keeps on standing out to me is the silhouette of her fighting Daredevil, and she like holds her foot and then just like builds up tension and lets it go, and just like
it's so
slams it
good.
down on Daredevil. It's just so cool.
That moment just made me cheer so much. And yeah, because I've definitely had, like, I'm not a martial artist by any means, and that's not because I have a prosthesis. It's just because I'm not in great shape, and I've never studied martial arts. But yeah, that scene, it was just, all of it was just exactly what I wanted to see. So
Yeah,
so happy about that.
but man, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. We've got about an hour already. We're going to do a quick bonus section for our members. And by the way, if you haven't thought of becoming a member, this is a great time to do so. It's only $5 a month, $55 a year. You get access to ad-free content. You get access to bonus content. As I mentioned, we're going to be starting book clubs, definitely for Star Wars universe, probably for superheroes as well. Once a month episodes that will be only for members. So definitely check those things out. Please become a member. It's a great way to support us. All the information is in the show notes. But before we wrap up, Will, any other last things you wanted to bring up or talk about, or any other last plot points or characters or story beats we haven't gotten into?
Just
comparisons with the comics.
Sure. So, okay, I guess I have two observations. One, I don't feel like cutting break lines works as amazingly well as like every single mob show does, because I refuse to believe that from when someone gets in the car to when they get hit, the first time they hit the brakes is when they're trying to stop at a traffic light. Like, even when you first turn the car on, your foot's on the brake. So like, and it's not an echo problem. It's literally just a generic storytelling problem that just stands out to me every time it happens. And that was like my least favorite part of the show because it took me out of it. But I don't know. I've never cut brakes on a car. I've never driven a car with the brake line cut. So I don't know if that's accurate, but it feels weird. Anyway. That's one thing. And then when I think of Echo, there's two design aspects about Echo from the comics that stand out to me. One is she has a white handprint that she uses like paint on her face. That's like part of her like putting on her costume, quote unquote. And that is an homage to when her father died. He left a bloody handprint on her face, and they did that in Hawkeye / the flashback of this show, where he like had his hand on her face and it like left blood stains on her. So I loved that. But then also her dad, and then also her costume going forward had this like circle triangle. Or triangles in a circle that is part of it's on her costume in the comics, and then her dad has a tattoo on his right shoulder, and then it was worked onto her vest, and then also her outfit that her grandma made has that same design, and I have zero familiarity with the Native American ties to that, but like when I think of Echo, I think of that circle triangle design, and I love that. Sorry, my dog. And I love that they had that in there, and it's like my favorite part about Echo as a character.
I need to take I want to respond to that, but I quickly first need to say I want to point out to everybody that if you're looking for a great podcast about comics by people who really know their comics, remember that Will started by saying he doesn't really know that much of it. Like, Echo is not like the one he really knows that well. And that level of detail that you can just pull from memory, like, is just like, yeah, sure. You know, like, listen to this man and his buddy Steve talk about comics on the Hype Is My Superpower podcast. It is phenomenal. They go so deep. They really talk about the kind of ethical questions we love, but also just the awesome fight scenes. They're very critical of things. They're not just hype men for it. Podcast name notwithstanding, definitely check out that podcast. But yeah, like, it is now, I guess, just kind of a point that all of these superhero shows have to hit, and I wouldn't mind if every now and then we skipped it, of here's the emotionally important story or just a funny story of how they get their first costume.
Sure.
But I did think that the whole story for this, and like her grandmother making it, and this kind of reconnecting with her grandmother and the power there, I have seen little things about it online from people talking about how, yeah, it is very authentic to the Choctaw community and things like that. And I can't speak to it, but it was just so beautifully done. I will also say, as someone who worked in car repair for a while, my understanding, as was told to me by the mechanic, so I think we're also just none of us have done this. It's very clear, but you can do things to damage the brakes so that they will slowly wear down and not be a problem until you're going at high speeds.
Oh, sure. Okay.
And I think cut the brake line is kind of just like movie, TV waving your hand over a much larger, complicated thing that 30 seconds of brake line technology wouldn't be what the show needed.
Mm-hmm.
But also, yeah, I was a little thrown by that. What I was a little more thrown by is, but again, in the kind of like, it's a superhero show where she's going to heal people with her hands. I'm not going to worry too much about the exact physics of it. As far as I understand, there hasn't been a windshield built in the last 50 years that would break in such a way that a huge piece of glass would on its own fly, break, they shatter.
Right. They're designed to shatter. Yeah.
And here's the thing. Did I have a moment of, okay, that doesn't really fit? Sure. Did it pull me out of what was an incredibly emotional scene? Not in the slightest.
Right.
And did it bother me in any real way? Not in the slightest. Because the idea that she loses her leg in a car accident, which makes total sense. And by the way, the idea of like, one of the ways you can lose your leg is if your leg doesn't have to be severed. If just anything happens to sever, I think it's the femoral artery, but whatever's the artery in your thigh, and your limb basically loses blood, even just for a couple of hours, it may often have to be amputated because just the loss of blood in just those few hours can be incredibly damaging. So all of that makes total sense. The fact that it's a big piece of glass, who cares?
I guess I would have crushed it, but yeah, that's fine.
I only bring this up because, as anything that is woman-led, there's a whole bunch of people on the internet who absolutely hate this. Many of them have probably never seen it. Some of them clearly watched enough to see that scene, or at least to see some other picture of the scene, because those parts of the internet are going crazy about the idea of, oh, this is so fake, it's embarrassing, it's badly done, how could you possibly do this? I've had 2 people come to me and be like, as an amputee, aren't you so offended by how badly this was done? And I'm like, no, absolutely not. Are the physics of it perfect? No. Should anyone in their right minds actually care? No. Why? Like, I'm never going to be the person who, well, that's probably too offensive. If you really care about granular details like that, and that's how you enjoy something, I'm not saying you're wrong. But if you then claim that everyone should focus on those granular details and not enjoy something if the granular details aren't right, I think it's just a really jerk position to take.
Yeah,
and maybe it's just...
Sure. Yeah, no, I guess the how it happened isn't as big of a deal as how are they representing it post happening. Like the reason to become amputated isn't as important as how you show an amputee post amputation.
Right. Well, and even then, I think they did answer it. If someone asked me how did she lose her leg, I would say someone was trying to get to her father because of her father's criminal ties or whatever. I should say that again. If someone asks me how did she lose her leg, I'm going to say her father was somehow connected to underworld stuff, and someone tried to get at his family, and there was a car crash, and in the car crash, her mother died, and Maya lost her leg.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like the fact that it's a piece of glass instead of maybe it should have been a piece of the dashboard or something, like,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I spent about 2 seconds on that. I was just like, where did that glass come from? Oh well.
Yeah.
Moved on.
I will say the 2 little quibbles that I would have had. And one of them is just a storytelling thing, and the other, I'm speaking about how I felt about how the deafness was portrayed. And so again, people who are more of that community, let me know your thoughts on it. first of all, though, just when she walks into her room and her mother is standing there, and it just looks like a person who is standing right there, it felt a little weird to me. In that I literally had a moment of like, wait, is this some like, you never see the dead body? We kind of saw the dead body, but like, if Fisk can survive being shot in the head, maybe the mom can. Like, I thought, well, the mom was literally alive, and
Yeah.
I wish there had been a little bit of like Force ghosty, like something to show that this was a spirit, or this was like, I don't think it's in her head. I think it was a real vision she was having,
Yeah.
but something to show that this was like a vision of her mother, or her mother reaching out through, I want to say through the veil, but that's a very kind of Western phrase of it. I don't know what would be appropriate language, but like
Through the echo.
yeah, that works. Which I did love the way that they gave that her name that way.
Yeah.
The other thing that threw me a bit was I thought there were some wonderful, wonderful moments where they cut out all the sound to show that they're showing this from Echo's perspective.
Yeah.
But in a lot of them, then they had music. And I just like,
sure. Yeah.
the music felt a little bit like they had to hold our hands a little bit and tell us like what we should be feeling in the scene. And you know, I did have one deaf person who I'm friends with through TikTok, and I asked them about this. Their comment was like, "Well, I didn't hear the music." And I was like, "Okay, that's perfectly fair."
Sure.
But
sure.
You know, which is I think a very valid position. But like, yeah, to me, I wish they hadn't had that. But again, those are two just like small quibbles, and I did think that for me as a hearing person, I thought it did a fantastic job of giving me an understanding of what she would how she would be experiencing the world in those moments.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny because I did, like, as a hearing person, I do notice that, you know, oh, this is from Maya's perspective, because all of the fighting sound effects and the grunts and everything are either muted or gone. But yeah, the music is still playing. I guess that didn't even click for me.
Yeah, that's fair.
No, well done.
Yeah, different people notice different things. I'm sure there's so many visual things that I noticed. But yeah, other than that, how do you feel about the MCU now, having seen this?
I guess, I mean, I come out of it feeling the same way I do about every other entry of just like, what's going to help me figure out how I feel about it is how this gets referenced in the next thing, or like whenever it shows up again, how is it going to get played from, or like what have they introduced, what have they done that they're going to use down the line, like Fisk running for mayor and sorry, I know my mic is picking up my dog right now, so I'm just Cricket.
People love dogs. It's fine.
Please stop. Thank you. Okay. So I'm looking for when's Fisk going to show up again? It's probably going to be Daredevil, but like, how is that going to play? The mayor of New York. So he's going to, you know, he will have this perspective of the civilian compared to all of the superhero shenanigans that go on. So I'm excited for that. I don't have a problem with the MCU. I think they did themselves a disservice in the big picture of saying that this is the multiverse saga and these three phases are going to be all multiverse. Whereas I feel like this is more of the expansion saga, and we're doing things like a Moon Knight and She-Hulk and Werewolf by Night and like these shows and movies like Shang-Chi, where it's like this is all also happening within the MCU. It's not just those core characters from the Avengers. There's all these other things going on, and I am super happy to get more entries into this expanded lore kind of a thing. I just the setting the expectation of multiverse saga really did a lot of the shows that are worth watching or have things that are good takeaways a disservice because they didn't feed into the multiverse aspect. Like, nothing about Echo says multiverse. And that's fine.
Like, I'm looking forward to her appearing in Daredevil's story. And if Daredevil appears, like, he's already appeared in a Spider-Man movie, but if Daredevil appears in an Avenger movie at some point, that's great. I have no expectation and no need for Echo to ever appear on the big screen. You know?
Sure.
I'm happy for it to be a smaller part of things. Yeah, I feel I still have superhero fatigue. I haven't seen I haven't seen the Marvels yet. I'm very excited for that movie. I think it's going to be really good. I've been very, with COVID being bad again and stuff like that, I don't want to go to a theater, but I'll probably, pay for it as soon as I can on Amazon or something like that. And yeah, this makes me feel a lot better about the MCU. I feel like the last couple of things that left me disappointed. This feels better. I'm going to just do a quick rundown of a couple of the last things I had, and then we'll close and do a member section. My Baby is a Centerfold is just a classic 80s song that I absolutely love. That the lyrics, like most 80s songs, have not aged well, but it's still a great song. And I love that, like, I think we often do think of like deaf people as being completely, like, I think it can be just like it's like hitting mute on your computer, but oftentimes there's still like, you can be aware of vibrations, or you can hear, as you said, sound is like, it's turned all the way down, but still there. So the fact that the song was playing just made my 80s kid heart so happy. And the fact that she was aware of it, I thought was a really nice character beat. I did comment early that I thought that we were seeing with Bonnie Chekhov's fire truck, because they made a point of showing that Bonnie is a firefighter and she's there with her fire truck. And I was like, oh, so clearly there's going to be a major fire and she's going to show up later. It turned out it was not Chekhov's fire truck, so that's fine. But I will say that the acting throughout this was top notch. One of my favorite moments may be Bonnie translating as someone is saying that he's going to kill Maya and Bonnie herself, because I'm trying to imagine what that would be like to be like trying to act as the dispassionate, like, I'm not here as part of the conversation. I'm just acting as the translator, but the words that I'm translating are utterly terrifying and horrifying to me. And just nothing, like, it would be so hard to not get that right. It's so easy to not get that right. And I felt just her acting there was utterly phenomenal. Love it. She kicks him, loves the sci-fi assistive tech. And just as one little character beat, and this is the last thing I'll say. Two other things I'll say, sorry. Let me just take it again. And then just two last things. One, it was very blink it, you miss it, but at the powwow, they had the American flag, and they also had the POW MIA flag, which, like, from, again, my very limited understanding, is a very important, I mean, it's important in a lot of communities, but, like, there were an awful lot of Native Americans who went into the military and were drafted or, wound up doing it because there's so little economic opportunities and are part of that community of people who were never found from Vietnam, POWs or missing in actions. And I from the few other Native gatherings I have been to, and from those who I've been friends with, they've often talked about how important that flag is in some of those communities. So that was brilliant. And then the last thing, just is because there was no commentary about it, but it was so perfect, having Wilson Fisk be connected to the Choctaw casino. Because, and again, I might be projecting a lot here onto it, but I know that particularly in some of the areas I've lived in, like New York State and Wisconsin, but also in others, the fact that a lot of these tribes have opened casinos where the promise is that it's going to bring real economic vitality to everyone in the tribal community. I think that happens sometimes, but a lot more often, a few people wind up getting a lot of the economic benefit, and then it just winds up feeding gambling addictions among people who are already very poor and disadvantaged. And there's been a lot of commentary by Native American activists about, like, are these casinos actually good for us? And is it mostly like white investors who are benefiting? And so again, I'm projecting all kinds of things, but to me, I read that as, of course, part of how Wilson Fisk would have first got connected to this community is that he's an investor in their casino. Like, it just fit so perfectly to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Will. We're going to have a quick member section. We're going to talk about some of the other Netflix MCU stuff and how it might show up or not show up, particularly in terms of what's the future for Fisk. But for those who are not members yet, hopefully hope you will become members. But for those who aren't, Will, where can they find you?
Come and find me on my podcast. Hype is my superpower. It's me and Steve Storman just gushing about Marvel Comics primarily. It's a lot of fun. I hope you enjoy your visit. You can find me specifically as Silver Dreamer all over the place, primarily Twitch. Silver with a Y, and I build Lego and building bricks and model kits and book nooks. Also on Sundays we read Marvel Comics. And we're in the middle of Original Sin, the 2014 crossover event, and it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, definitely check out Will's podcast. Definitely check out the stream. They're both awesome things. The link for those in the show notes. Of course, I am the Ethical Panda. You go to theethicalpanda.com or just find me on True Story FM. You'll find this podcast, the the Star Wars Heroes podcast. A lot of great things happening on both. We have finally wrapped up our Rebels coverage. We're going through the original movies with my new hosts because this is me being dumb because I woke up early to do this. It is the Star Wars Generations podcast now because I've got two great new hosts who are we have a millennial, a Zoomer, and myself, a Gen Xer, and we're having a lot of fun talking about Star Wars over there. Check all that out, and of course, become a member. You get a lot more content. You get ad-free content, but most importantly, it helps keep the lights on. It helps do all the things that are necessary to make this podcast content. And of course, give us feedback. I'd love to know what you think of Echo. I'd love to know what you think of these characters, particularly if you are deaf or native or disabled or an amputee or any of those things, but also just whoever you are. We'd love to hear your thoughts. All the information is on the show notes. You can join our Discord. You can tweet at me. You can Facebook me, all those different things. So please check all that out. Please stick around for our member section if you are a member. And for everybody else,
we have spoken.
All right, to our members, welcome back. We're going to keep this pretty short because it's been a long session already, although with me and Will, keeping it short is we'll see how well that goes. We're going to try. Yeah. What do you think happened to Fisk? And what's his future? Because at first it seemed like she was actually healing him and letting him let go, but it does seem like he is still out there. So the two theories that I had was either one, that it didn't work because she doesn't have that power enough, or B, that she got him over his own personal vengeance stuff enough that he's able to let that go and to start trying to be a helper. But that now, instead of just trying to beat people up, he's going to try and become the mayor. But he is still going to be he hasn't she's kind of gotten him to another step in his advancement of letting go of the pain of killing his father and the abuse of his mother. But he's still not totally a happy, good guy because he's still going to be a villain, just a very different kind of villain. What did you think happened?
Yeah, it's so interesting to me because he's already such a well thought out character that oh man, what are they going to do with him? So, okay, I do think that she healed him as much as he is able to be healed, in the sense that she got him to not take the hammer and go into the other room. And so, but because we don't get a whole lot more after that, when he said, "What did you do to me?" I feel like she helped him get rid of the pain associated with that memory, but not necessarily the rage. And so now I think it's going to be a different kind of anger that we get from him going forward. Yeah. So, oh man, I don't know. So, okay, referentially, in the comics right now, Norman Osborn got his this is so comic-y. He got his sins eaten, but so
so Catholic.
Yeah, so he doesn't have the pain or the guilt associated with the things that he's done, but he now has this innocence guilt. So it's not an evil haha I did this. It's a more holy crap I hurt all these people guilt.
Right.
And so he's trying to come to terms with that. And so it's not a very good story. And so I don't want that to happen with Fisk here, because it's a really it's not a great plot device. And so I'm what I'm thinking how they're going to be able to use this is I wonder if they're going to ask Vincent D'Onofrio to flex his acting even more. And so when he becomes a mayoral candidate, he can actually smile with like a light in his eye because he has a different relationship with his past trauma and his pain, and he can use that to win the hearts of the people. Yeah. So that's what I'm thinking. It's gonna like maybe he'll even cry at an interview of like, so why you? And he'll like make a reference to his terrible upbringing, and it'll actually bring a tear to his face instead of just like this controlled anger on his face. I'd be interested to see if he still has his twitch after post
which is
Maya.
so well done.
Oh, so well done. It's so well done.
You've taken me in a couple of different directions here because, like, where I was thinking it would go, I mean, I kind of sketched this out already, but just say a little bit more about that, was like let me start that again. Because one thing I was thinking about a lot as you were talking about that, and also I was thinking about it, is like, one of the things that is hardest in therapy, and this was hard for me, but and like talking to a lot of therapist friends of mine, reading articles, like I know it comes up a lot, is letting go of trauma. In part because when it has been just such a major part of your life, it's kind of terrifying to be like, what would that be like without it? You know, and it's this like, you know, it's this bad thing, but you've never, you know, since before the trauma, or in many cases before you can remember, like, you know, you don't, what's your life like without it? And so to me, yeah, there could be that, and him kind of really wrestling with that's the kind of what have you done to me. One thing that also occurs to me though is that in Daredevil, he starts out already somewhat civically minded in that he does want to clean up his city. We haven't seen any of that so far in this version of Kingpin. And that it's always just been, again, kind of that hero thing of like, I just want to like protect my family. I want to protect the people who matter to me while becoming economically, you know, incredibly successful. And I wonder if that's the kind of like, this is the next stage of his healing, and that he's the kind of like, because the other thing I think this really comes up is he does have a lot of guilt and grief. And I think when he offers Maya the hammer and says, you can kill me, I think that is 100% legitimate. I don't think that's a fake out where he's like, I'll stop her because I'm a better fighter.
Not at all.
And I think it's because he still carries an incredible amount of guilt about what he did to his father. Oh my God. Actually, as I'm saying this, it comes a better way. What if she allowed him to forgive himself for killing his father? Which then it doesn't become therefore I can be a good person, so I could be a good person, but it's instead, I used my violence to protect my mother. I shouldn't feel guilty about it. Oh my God. So now he shouldn't feel guilty about it anymore. So in some ways, it's like, it's the supervillain origin story for him. And now it's like, I should protect more people using the powers that I have, which is my money, my influence. Because we already saw, like, he has the cops completely under his thumb. That scene was so well done. But, oh God, yeah, what if that's really, like, and so now she has to deal with, like, this is who I created.
My bad. Sorry, New York.
Because the other way I was thinking about that before that occurred to me is, and again, like Matt Murdock, very Catholic. Catholic guilt is a huge part of his story, and especially in the Netflix shows. I think another very interesting direction would be if he is really trying to like go the straight and narrow, but Daredevil doesn't believe it. And so there's some level of like, he does fall back into criminal ways. And like, maybe that means Daredevil's right, that he was always going to fall back into it, but maybe it's because Daredevil won't like believe that he could be a good person. Like, I like that they've left it in a way that we could speculate forever, but there really are so many different directions they could go, and all of them could be awesome.
Absolutely. Fisk. So Fisk has been the mayor in the comics. He recently got outed. But one of the things that he has had a lasting effect over the last couple of years is he made super heroics illegal. And to make it different from the Superhero Registration Act, which the parallel to the MCU is the Sokovia Accords. Instead of making all superheroics illegal, they made it so all underage superheroics is illegal. And so, like, I almost so like if Kamala Khan ever goes public with being Miss Marvel, that would become breaking the law. And
so it's like the Civil War kind of registration acts, but
yeah,
for New York City specifically, that kind of idea.
Yeah, and so they basically made it so if you're underage, you cannot do superheroics unless you are unless you have an adult mentor who is already an established hero. So like Miles Morales in the comics just recently became the mentee of Misty Knight, which is kind of random, but there it is. And so that kind of permeated plot line of it's called the Powers Act. I'd be really interested to see what kind of a law a Mayor Fisk in the MCU would bring in, because he has a very different relationship and history with superheroes in the MCU because it's just not as established and it's not as long, and he's only really dealt with Punisher, Daredevil, and Maya at this point. So like, does he have an issue against superheroes? I don't know. So I'm really curious what a Mayor Fisk in the MCU can and will do.
I'm really curious, and I admit my initial feeling is very trepidatious because, like, we were talking before about how one thing we like is that this is the street level stuff. The like, yeah, Captain America's not going to care about that. Except I feel like both because they've already gone through it with Civil War, but also because like a lot of them are still very connected to New York City. Like, how does Doctor Strange not get involved in that to some extent? You know, how do these other Avenger level people who are very connected to New York City, even like Kamala Khan, she lives in a New York City suburb, so she would not be directly affected by this law. But like, having lived in the New York City area for most of my, certainly at least half of my life, more than half of my life, like I know that like what happens in New York City politics absolutely affects like Northern New Jersey politics and Westchester politics and Long Island politics. So I don't think they can do that story without it becoming without it feeling like a repeat of Civil War, but also without it being like that, yeah, the Avenger level people do have to pay attention to it. And even it might be like, like maybe in the next time Doctor Strange is in a movie, like Wong is like, oh yeah, what do you think about the mayor? They're like, come on, the president, when the nation tried to, when the United Nations tried to do this, it didn't work. I don't care about what the mayor does. Like,
sure.
But I think they'd have to actually deal with it in some way. So yeah, I love the idea in comics. I kind of don't know if it could work without Wilson Fisk kind of becoming the big bad of the next Avenger stuff, which like if you're
that's unrealistic.
They might not do Kang anymore, so maybe it's gonna be that instead, but that feels like
that's
a whole other story.
So as a mayor, you enter into like to flex your power, you do legal stuff, and so there could be a cameo from like a Jen Walters. Another storyline was Matt Murdock.
Let me just.
Sure.
Oh yeah, actually, I think you're right to say what I was gonna say. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know if I was, but like another sort of like Matt Murdock helped pass a law where superheroes could testify in costume because of their secret identities, and so that's a plot line, that element that they could do for an episode. I don't see a whole season being worked around that, but like I see a Fisk or an attorney of Fisk going up against a Jen and or a Matt Murdock.
Yeah, I can see that. That was basically what I was going to say, is that I did, and granted, this is not what most comic book movie people want to see, but I knew enough about like the courtroom drama side of the Civil War story, and I was sad we didn't get any of like Matt Murdock's doing that stuff in the Civil War movie.
Yeah,
I'd love to see that, but but you could have a cute little story. Like, yeah, again, it'd be one episode of like he tries to do this, and like Matt Murdock brings up Civil War and all this stuff, and at the end, Sam Wilson like appears to be just like, "Thanks for taking care of that. I didn't want to have that fight again," or something like that.
Yeah.
Let me just close then with this. 'Cause I'm wondering if you were feeling this. I did like the end credit scene we got, the mid credit scene, but what I was hoping for since that thing in episode 1 was that possibly Daredevil, but even more so, I wanted Foggy or Karen to show up at the end, in the end credit, and just sit down with Maya and say something like, "So here we have a friend in common," or like, like, "So I feel like you're also not fond of Mr. Fisk," just anything like that to like, and maybe that would be setting the ground too much for the next thing.
Right. That's my knee jerk on that.
It would have been such a wonderful way to say like, "Oh, hey, this person," because I've later learned that we actually did know that Daredevil was going to be in this and that a lot of that fight had been released online. Here, I'm so happy for my no spoilers thing. I had no idea.
Yeah, neither did I.
So when we just, yeah. So anyway. All right. Well, Will, thank you so much. You've been such an awesome guest. Just to be clear, I asked Will to be on this 14 hours ago, and Will woke up early to be a part of this. It's early for me, but Will's in the West Coast, even more so. Check out all the great things Will is doing. Check out what I'm doing. Please become a member. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And stop.